Good morning, Law Bullock here with Meldon Law. I'm here with Judge Hallman, Bud Hallman. I heard him when I first met him. It was the rodeo judge, and I've heard him referred to as the John Wayne with a law degree now. So got a few different names. Once we get through a few announcements, we'll jump right into that. Meldon Law, as you know, we help everyone in North Central Florida community that has been injured as a result of a serious accident. Consultations are free. You can come into our office and meet with us in person. We're local. We have offices in Gainesville, Ocala, and Lake City. What's going to be a little bit new is we're just now opened an office in Williston. We're waiting on the signage to get there, but that's going to be where I'm at. Naturally, as a lot of y'all know, I do criminal defense and student conduct hearings as well. So y'all reach out to us with any of those. We have the Wind FM Rock the Riley, Saturday, July 20th at 7:30 p.m. You can journey into the world of rock royalty with Absolute Queen. That's basically Absolute Queen recreates the electrifying atmosphere of a Queen concert. Apparently they do the costume changes, the vocals, everything just like you're used to seeing out of Queen. They sing the legendary track songs like Bohemian Rhapsody and We Are the Champions. Another one's Bites the Dust. They'll be doing that at the Riley Arts Center in Ocala. The tickets are $25 to $50. We also have PAVE, People Against Violence Enterprises. That's coming up on the 25th. That's the 25th annual Stop the Violence Back to School rally. That's coming up on the 27th. I'm sorry. That'll be held. And we're partnering with sponsoring up to 3,000 school bags so they can give to thousands of students in Alachua County. For the past 25 years, we've been a community partner with the PAVE, the People Against Violent Enterprises, Meridian Behavioral Health Services in the city of Gainesville, Alachua County, the Alachua County School Board, and the 8th Circuit State Attorney's Office. ASO, GPD, Martin Luther King Commission of Florida, and others have sponsored the Stop the Violence preschool rally. This has traditionally brought thousands of school-age students and their families together to receive a free preschool supply of services and of an entertainment program that delivers an anti-violence message aimed at children and their behavior response to avoiding violent situations. Also, as always, y'all can check out Meldon Law's ticket giveaways. Y'all can go onto our Facebook and find that. We're always giving away tickets for basketball, gymnastics, baseball, softball, whatever season is in play. So whatever's in full swing, feel free to hop on there and apply for those. All right, Judge Hallman, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Doing good, good.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm happy to have you here. I've been excited about this one. I've been asking Mr. Jeffrey for a little while to set it up, so here we are.
Here we are.
So I don't know, before we got online here, I was telling you, do you remember, I guess it was 2018, first time I got out of law school, Judge Militello was out, right, and you covered the VOP docket. Do you remember that?
I do remember that, and I'm sure that was an old me for some people.
I got a kick out of it because I was scared to death. I got there early, right, and I remember getting there about an hour early, and the prosecutors ended up pulling in right at 1 or 1:30 or whatever it was scheduled for, and I will never forget. As one of I tell this story all the time because I hadn't been barred for a minute, right? I was just green as grass, and everybody was telling me, they're like, "Oh, Judge Hallman, he's old cowboy, he's tough, right? His sentences tough, I was scared to death, but I remember that last lady that I had on the VOP. She said, "Judge, I'll admit that I violated my probation, but the only reason why I violated is because I was late." Do you remember what you said to those prosecutors?
You'll have to.
You told me, you said, "Y'all weren't here an hour early. I view that as being late." He said, "Ain't nobody holding y'all. We're going to turn her loose." I tell that story. I'll never forget it. I swear. I laughed at that. At the time I was like, whew, relieved. But in hindsight, that stuck with me. I try to be a good bit early to everything that I do. Just as try to get to the courthouse as early. I
always was a stickler for the time, and I felt like it was, if you say court's going to start at 9 o'clock, for instance, then you have an obligation to the people not to waste their time sitting waiting for you to start court. But then again, I thought they should respect the system, and I used to kid people. You might have heard me say that, and when someone would be late and they'd say, well, I was here at 10 after 9, and I'd say, well, you would have been late if you'd have been here at 8:50 for the 9 o'clock
I've heard you say that repeatedly. You told me, you said, if I remember right, you said you used to get breakfast an hour before or something right there, if I remember
I did.
right.
When I used to practice and come over to Sumter County and the court was going to start at 9 o'clock, I was 8 o'clock over there having a little quick breakfast at the restaurant across the road and it helped. I mean, you get in there, you get things done, and you move efficiently, and the taxpayers' money is well spent on that because everything is done in an expedient manner that helps everybody.
Absolutely.
It helps the lawyers to get completed what they got to do there, and they can move on to the other things they need to do, and it gives closure for the people, the participants in the court system.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I tell you, I try to have everything ironed out before I get to court. But there's always something to be said for being trapped in a room with the other side having to talk about it, right? You'd be shocked what you can get done.
I think people do not realize that if you're there early and you're in that courtroom as lawyers, that you get the opportunity to, the more relaxed setting of being able to just say, hey, it's about to start, and I was kind of thinking about this, or do we need to do this?
Or this is the hang up on this plea, right? We've emailed about it, but why can't you do that, right? Like now that we're sitting here, it's not as formal. You're not held to anything. Like just tell me what the hang up is, right? And actually work some things out.
And get some ideas of I remember one time in that courtroom when I was an attorney and coming in, and the offer from the state, I was in defense standpoint, the offer from the state was pretty severe, but they told me that the judge that was going to be in, the prosecutor said, hey, if you open plea on this type of case and you say the following things, we're not going to be, we're not offering you a withholding probation, but you will get a withholding probation from the judge because the judge likes when you say these things.
Yeah. And knowing your judge, that goes a long ways too.
Well, I used to, when I was going to a different county or someplace, I would call ahead of time, find some attorney that I knew in the area and say, hey, I'm going to be in front of Judge so-and-so. And, because I learned the hard way about that a good little tale about that. I went in front of a judge, and my wife had bought me a red pinstripe dress shirt, and I had it on with my suit, and I came in front of that judge, and I didn't know that this judge believed that everybody should wear a white shirt and a dark tie.
Interesting.
And
you never know that either without asking.
So I walk up with my client, very confident, and I think I was just asking for a continuance, and as I started to talk, the judge put his hand up like this, and I stopped. Yeah. And he said, I need to talk to your client. And I thought, well, I got to stop this. But he goes, it was a lady, and he said, ma'am, do you have any trouble being in court represented by an attorney who would wear a pink shirt? And I think she was ready to fire me at that point. She didn't care what it was about. She thought, I'm going to fire this. I didn't know any better than that. So I learned from then on, and I would ask, some of the lawyers would laugh and go, what are you talking about? I said, anything about shirt, color, suit, anything like that
it's worth asking, right? Absolutely worth asking. Now, I introduced you as the rodeo judge, the John Wayne with a law degree. I've heard it on Luke Branquino's show that way. But when I got down to the Fifth, when I first started practicing, for y'all that don't know, I was in the Fifth Circuit, Sumter County, and Judge Hallman was the judge there. So how did you get that reputation, right? I remember when I first got down there, you were steer wrestling, or at least there was an article about it everyone was talking about. Can you kind of give, our listeners a little bit of insight into your background there?
All right. Well, I grew up in a kind of a strange situation. My mother's family were a big ranching family in the state of Florida. My father was an attorney. So I grew up with both of those as part of my life from the very beginning. So I didn't find it that unusual to be doing both. But
everybody else was, right?
As time went on, I eventually I worked on ranches as I was growing up, and so when I got up to the University of Florida, I was up here, and while working on one of those ranches, they had, and I knew a lot about the rodeo cowboys in Florida at the time. On a ranch that I was working at was one of the famous rodeo cowboys of the time, and he would tell me all these stories. So I got up here, strangely enough, to the University of Florida, and there were some people not far from here that rodeoed.
Right.
So I got in with them and started steer wrestling well, I was going to be like a bronc rider or a bull rider, but they looked at me and they said,
That's hard on your body.
well, and they said, you're way too big to get on our horses, so you're going to learn to be a steer wrestler. So that's what got me into that, and I proceeded on with that. My father, on the other hand, had one dream for my life, and that was for me to be an attorney like he was. So I had a lot of pressure there with that, but I fell in love with the steer wrestling and went on to achieve a few things with that. Left the University of Florida and went off and rodeoed for a number of years.
I was going to say, you've got quite the resume for what you did with the steer wrestling, right?
Well, I went on, when I left, I was in my third year up here, right at 3 years. I had a little over 2 years, and my father was very formal, and he called me and he said, I need to see when you're going to be getting into law school. How you doing with your grades, and what are you getting your degree in, your undergrad? And I started laughing, and I said, well, I got a lot of directions I could go right now on that undergrad degree, but I don't have enough, to get any certain one just yet. And he said, well, how's that grade point average, which would later be difficult when I decided to go back and go to law school, but I said, well, I don't know, we need to discuss that right now. So he said, that's it, I'm cutting you off from any funds to go to school on. And so I headed out to rodeo. And in that period of time, people don't realize that in the state of Florida, there was a lot of rodeos. These were not professional rodeos. Some of them were, but a lot of them were just rodeos that went on. Like the one I said in Lake Placid, every Friday night was a rodeo. Every Saturday night in a place called River Ranch was a resort, had a rodeo. There was one in Fort Pierce every Sunday. These were not professional rodeos, but these were rodeos that paid money. So immediately I could go out and work cattle for people, go to those 3 rodeos, and you'd say, well, you only won $400 a week? Well, back
then that was good money.
1975, that was a lot of money.
Right.
And then, it kind of rocked on, and I ended up, we had down here what was called the Florida Cowboys Association, which was had a year-end state champion in each event, and it was part of the International Professional Rodeo Association, which, gave world championships away. So I went forward and did fairly well in that, and then I switched over to the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. That's kind of strange because I went through all that and then decided to go to law school, and when I got into law school I switched over to the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association, and at that time that I was in law school, every year I went to 45 to 50 professional rodeos just in the state of Florida, and largely
That's
from Gainesville south.
Right, that's every weekend or
pretty much, every weekend going to rodeos, professional rodeos in the state of Florida. It's not like that anymore, but it was at that time.
Right. And I think I saw some pictures on your Facebook. Didn't y'all used to travel? You did a lot of traveling, right? A van or something? I think I saw that on there.
You went way down in that. Yeah, that was the way people wondered how you could do it. Back in those days, rodeos did not pay like they do now.
Right.
When I said $300 or $400, $500 a week, that was pretty much. But we would gather together.
Right.
And like that, I think there was probably about 10 people. We were all traveling in that van and had got to a rodeo out on the Panhandle, actually, was where that was from. But we would, a lot of times when I was, when I had a cattle ranch, I had a cattle ranch for a few years down in Southwest Florida where some of my mother's family is from. And we would take off, like say on a Thursday night, and we'd have 10 people loaded up and going up to a rodeo in Tennessee or out to Arkansas or wherever, and we'd drive out there and make 3 or 4 rodeos and come back to Florida. So
just riding a circuit, huh?
Right.
That's pretty neat. I've seen the old movies, 8 Seconds, whatever else, where they're doing all that stuff, but it's I never thought about that being I guess it's fairly common, right? I mean,
well, yeah, and and that method was more common back then because it helped you get down the road. And when you mentioned 8 seconds, I was competing at Cheyenne. I made the Cheyenne finals that year.
Wow.
1989, that Lane Frost was killed by that bull.
Man.
I was probably, I finished competing in the steer wrestling. It was the finals. That day he was killed by that bull was the finals at Cheyenne. Right. Okay, back then they had 2 go-arounds, and the top 15 went to the finals on Sunday. And I had finished competing in the steer wrestling, was sitting at the corner of the bucking chute where he came out at, and when he went down, this normally doesn't happen, the ambulance flew into the arena. I mean, you don't see that on the movie. I'm telling you, it was probably going over 50 miles an hour into the arena. They threw him in. They didn't even slow down. They just put him in, and I guarantee you, by the time they left the gate of that arena, they were at over 100 miles an hour.
Man.
And so, we pretty well.
It was critical. I mean,
right.
they knew it was bad.
Critical, right? Yeah.
Whew. That's before I was born. I didn't even think about you potentially being at that rodeo. That's pretty intense.
That always gets to me when people say that. I had a second career in rodeo after I became a judge. I went to a guy in Brooksville, had a steer wrestling clinic that he was putting on. Right. And he called me, and it was in August. And we know how August is in Florida. And he said, hey, I've got these guys at the clinic, and they're all complaining and, about the heat and everything. He said, hey, could you come out and do maybe throw a few down and give them a pep talk? And I said, sure. Well, I hadn't been on a horse or been around it for 15 years.
Right.
So I said, well, I'll come out there and visit. And so anyhow, that's what got me in this second career. I came out there to visit, and one of the boys was trying to throw a steer, and I was trying to talk to him, and the steer jumped loose of him and jumped in my arms, and I threw him down. So one of the guys there said, well, you should get your professional card back and go
start
rodeo.
Doing it again. Right?
So I sort of thought, well, they won't even give me my card back. It's been too long. So I called him. I said, am I still qualified? My card still, my membership still? They said, yep. So that segued into me going off and traveling on the weekends in 2009, for which I qualified for the the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association Southeastern Circuit Finals Rodeo, and I won that and qualified me to compete for the national championship in that year. It was in Pocatello, Idaho, for the national championship, which I did not win.
Well, you were on the bench when that was happening, right?
I was on the bench when all that happened.
So that's what's incredible to me is I feel like that's such a drastic difference in like you're lawyering by day or judging by day, and then you're rodeoing by night, or I guess weekends.
Weekends,
what I mean?
Yeah, and I would practice in the evening after I got off work, and it's a sport, and it's the professional level. It's not the local.
And you got to train like a professional for that, right? I mean, that's got to consume.
Train very hard. I had a friend that really pushed me and made me train probably more than at 56 years old that I wanted to train. Trained very, very hard to get that accomplished, and he pushed me, sometimes not being real nice to me, just making me like I was a kid, just like, no.
Absolutely.
You get up and do it again. Nope. Get up and
back
do it again.
Back in the saddle, right?
Yep.
And and I guess I guess we should probably put it out there. I don't think that a lot of our listeners with Meldon are going to be familiar with what steer wrestling is. You know what I'm saying? I know what it is. I grew up with that background, but we have a bunch of lawyers and things like that just aren't exposed to that. So
Well, it's an event in professional rodeo. It was started by a man named in the old Wild West show days, when they were coming back east and putting on a Wild West show. A black cowboy by the name of Bill Pickett all of a sudden decided to chase down a steer, jump off, and actually the reason it was called bulldogging originally was because he would then lean over and bite their nose, and the steer would lay down.
Right.
So it then progressed on from there to when a professional rodeo started as an event. And what it is you have two horses. The one horse on the right side is the what's called the hazer, and their job is to keep the steer running somewhat straight so that you can get a shot at jumping off the horse you're riding on the left side. This is a steer that weighs average between 550 and 600 pounds with horns, and you jump off and try to grab the horns, and then you use the leverage of the horns to lay the steer over on its side. Smaller arenas, a 4 or 5 second run to do that from the time your horse leaves until the steer's laying on its side. You do that in 4 or 5 seconds. At some of the rodeos like Cheyenne, it's more like 9 or 10 seconds because it's bigger arena and you go a lot further down the arena.
It's further run, right?
Right, and
and what are the steers weighing on these things these days?
Around 550. Now back, people hate my old tales, but back in the 70s, and when I started, they were weighing more like 750 pounds.
That's what I was going to ask. I thought they probably use pretty decent sized. I mean,
right,
550 is not small, but
right.
750, 800 pounds is big.
But in some ways, the 750 pound steers easier to throw because of their strength.
Right.
It actually caused the dynamics where they would fall because they would go so hard to try to pack you off that it would throw them off balance, whereas the smaller steers are a little more wiry and quick, and they can get around a lot of things you try to do, so it changes your technique
a little more squirrely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, Judge, I think we're at our first break here, so
okay.
let's pull out for just a minute.
Jeffrey, what are you doing?
Well, I'm joining the band, of course. Since Meldon Law is the official law firm partner of the Florida Gators, I want to help.
Dad, we're litigators. Let's stick to helping people in the courtroom.
Well, can we still hang out and jam a little bit? At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
I was going down a one-way street and a girl that was driving her car T-boned me on my scooter. I ended up going for an MRI and discovering that I had 2 herniated discs. Coming to Cary allowed me to not have to worry about what doctor I was going to see or what physical therapist I had to go to. They say, these are the people we trust. You're going to have a great experience there, and I honestly did each time.
Call Meldon Law. Your consultation is absolutely free.
Albert, Alberta, I understand you were witnesses to a crash. Can you tell us about the accident? When you're in a crash, it's important to get witness statements immediately after the accident. Whether you're in a car, truck, motorcycle, scooter, or even a golf cart accident, at Meldon Law, we won't back down.
And I was in an accident. Someone ran a red light and hit me, and I was hurt. You don't know where to turn. Luckily, I called Jeffrey. These big insurance companies, they don't want you to win. They truly don't. But Jeffrey and his firm and the people that work here, they just really fight for you. You call the law offices of Jeffrey Meldon because you're going to need help, and they will help you.
Call Meldon Law right now.
Hey, Sammy, look who's there. Say hi.
Hey!
You again!
Meldon Law, Jeffrey speaking.
Jeffrey!
Somebody else hit us here!
Yeah.
Here we go again.
After the car accident, your personal life takes a toll when you have major injuries. Being a mother of 3 kids, having to work, it became overwhelming. Didn't know what was going to be my outcome, but Meldon Law actually, they went above and beyond.
At Meldon Law, we're not just your legal team, we're your support system. You do not have to go through this alone. At Meldon Law, we won't back down.
All right, Judge, now that we're back on, I know we've talked about the rodeo stuff a bit, but, I think, you've had a very lucrative legal career too, right? So I just wanted to kind of ask you a little bit about that. How did you get started and how did that go?
Well, I go back to my father was an attorney and very successful, down in Palm Beach County.
Right.
And so that I sort of grew up with that. In fact, in the 3rd grade, the teacher wanted you to put down what you're going to do when you grow up, so to speak.
Right.
And I put that I would be a cowboy and a sophisticated lawyer. So that tickled my teacher at the time. But, so I always had that. And how I got into being, as I said, I took off rodeoing and worked on ranches, and eventually my father and my family, we had a ranch. So he, one day, he called me and he said, I need $50,000 to pay something on the ranch. And he said, can you gather the cattle, cut out the steers, and just enough for $50,000? Can you hit that mark dead on? And I said, yeah, I can do that. So we gathered the cattle. I cut off the number I thought, studying the market conditions, that would get us exactly $50,000. Well, the check came back from the market at $50,010 net.
Just a little off.
Just a little off. So I went in to see, my dad called me, always very formal, come into the law office, and in I went. I saw the check laying there. I said, well, I'm finally going to get the good guy award from my father. So he was sitting there and we talked for a little bit. He said, well, I made a decision. I said, what's that? He said, you're going to law school. And I said, well, no, I'm not going to law school. He said, well, why not? Why won't you go to law school? And so I said, well, I'm a cowboy. And he said, where are you a cowboy at? I said, right here on this ranch. He said, not any longer, you're fired.
He made that decision for you.
Yeah, I always get my way. And unfortunately, he passed away about 3 months after that. And so it hit me that if it was that serious, that was always something I kind of wanted to do. So I went to law school. I got out and went to work for a law firm in Boca Raton, and was a great learning experience because we were doing some very high-end kind of work that very few.
Well, like commercial work, or what was it?
Well, they civil litigation. They had a civil litigation department. They let me in on a little bit of that, and a lot of real estate. They did real estate closings, real estate litigation, and of course estate planning. That was the big area.
Right.
In fact, they put me in charge of doing the real estate closings. You're right out of law school. They don't. You don't know any of this stuff, really.
Right.
So,
they don't prepare you.
And I was a little bit older, so we went in for my first real estate closing, and it was on a multi-million-dollar deal. So here's the lawyers and their clients, the sellers. Here's the lawyers and their clients, the buyers. I have studied. I've got it all down. I'm feeling really good. So I come in to sit down for the first, for this closing. It was my first closing to do. So I sit down.
And it's a big one.
And so I thought, let everybody let's just let them introduce themselves to me. So we're going with the introductions that is calming me down. And the one lawyer over there, he goes, don't listen to him. It's his first closing. And I got so nervous. I said, oh, I need to go get some paperwork. And I picked up the paper and walked out of the closing, went into the copy room.
Right.
And I was there for a few minutes going, what am I going to do? I'm really messing this up. And the attorney came walking in there. He said, this isn't your first closing, right? I said, it is. He said, oh, I feel terrible. He said, I just thought by judging your age that, this would
You've done this before.
Yeah, you've been done this forever. And he said, don't worry about a thing. So we went back in and finished that. But things were very, very crowded down there, fast living. And I decided that for my family, I'd like to move more up to, north central Florida area. So I applied at some prosecutor's office, and the Fifth Circuit, Brad King, gave me a job in Brooksville. So I started there and got to do quite a few trials there as a prosecutor, and had some success at it. But I saw a real opening for private practice there, so I just I resigned, and it was a great experience working for Brad because I got to go. They have here in Gainesville, I think they still have it, the prosecutor public defender trial training, and
yes, sir.
He put me through that.
At least they did when I was doing it.
And then he also sent me out to Houston, University of Houston had the the District Attorney's College, and I got to go to that. So a lot of great, you were learning from the best.
Right,
You're
right.
learning from the best. So, and then I went into my own practice, and it took off. It took
Good.
off right from the beginning. I was making a very, very nice living, and I still don't know why I suddenly thought, well, there's a judgeship coming in. This story kind of happens where I got, someone told me that the governor was appointed for some position that required an attorney. So they
Right.
put my name in for it. And after my name went in, they said, it looks like you're pretty much going to get it. And I was reading a little more about it, and it said that, if you got this position, you couldn't put in to be a judge for a number of years.
Right, right.
And I just kind of felt funny about that. And so I felt like all of a sudden something came over me that said, well, you're going to be the next judge, so you can't do this.
Just had a feeling.
Yeah. And and I prayed about it, and I said, if it's not meant to be, then, and so I got a call the next morning, and I guess the governor was about to sign my name on this. And they said, we're walking in right now, and the governor's going to sign your name. Well, a few minutes later, the phone rings, and it's the governor's administrative staff. And
Right.
if you're getting appointed to something, it's the governor that calls you, not the administrative staff.
Right,
So
right.
I got the
I
call.
haven't been through it, but I've heard.
Yeah. So I got that call and said, thank you for putting it in. You didn't get it. Well, so I thought something came over me about the next judge. So you know what? I'm going to put in for the next position that comes open in the Fifth Circuit. It wasn't but about a month later that one came open. So I put in for it, and I got the position. So, but anyhow, it was kind of, when I got appointed, the governor called, he appointed me, and I was sitting in my office going, have I messed up? I was looking around, and I thought, I've got all these clients, I've got all this money coming in, I've got to get, and they basically
do
said,
something with it, right.
you got to shut all this down, I'm going to have to give money back and all this sort of stuff. And I thought, I don't know if I did the right thing or not. And I was sitting there, and an attorney came by to congratulate me, had heard about it, and I said, I'm going to tell you the truth. His name was Bill. I said, Bill, I think I'm going to call the governor and tell him I'm not taking it. I can't. I don't want to do this.
Right.
And he said, you just stop and think, what it means to get that appointment.
Pretty big deal.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. I called my aunt.
Right.
She's passed away now, and I said, hey, I just got appointed as a circuit court judge. And she said, well, you never could hold down a job. I guess you're going to the next one. So,
Not the response you expect, right?
Right. But in my career as an attorney, I tried everything as far on the criminal side, from DUI to the death penalty cases, and was certified to do death penalty cases.
Were you doing that defense and prosecutor? Or?
No, just as defense.
Defense,
During my
okay.
term as a prosecutor, I had the number at one time of trials I did, but I did, I was on the felony docket. I was on the misdemeanor for like a month.
Right.
And so I had no trial training, and they told me when I got, hired for the position, they said, we'll get you all the training you need, but we need somebody to get started right now in the misdemeanors in Brooksville.
That's how they did me in Sumter. They said, here's your cases.
Well, that's what happened. So that the guy that had been the misdemeanor prosecutor there, he had 60 cases set for trial on the Monday after the Friday that I showed up down there. And he left, and so I worked all weekend trying to come up with something. I'd been in the judge's court that Friday, and I found something, a set of questions, and I said, you mind if I copy this and take it with me? And he kind of looked at me kind of funny, and he said, no, that's okay. Well, so anyhow, I get there Monday thinking I've got to try 60 cases in a week. And Mr. King came
5
by.
days, right?
Mr. King came by and says, how have you been doing with getting some of these pled out? I said, what?
Didn't know that was an option.
And he said, well, you better start getting some of them pled out. So I looked around. He walked out. I looked around at the attorneys. I said, it's the blue light at Kmart right now.
Right,
you need
right.
to come right
we
now.
can get this done, huh?
So we ended up having to, I had 2 cases set for trial, and one of them was a DUI with a issue about putting person behind the wheel, because they found
Wheel
him
witness,
and
right.
found a vehicle, and found him to
Not in the vehicle, and then there
not
you
in
go,
the
right?
vehicle, and so it was going to be a little bit of difficulty, and it had been an accident, and so we get ready for trial, and so I've got my questions I'm going to ask the jury. So I'm
right.
sitting there.
For voir dire, right?
Yeah. So the judge comes in, sits down, and says, "I'd like to just talk to you all for a minute." And he starts down asking questions. That's when I realized those questions were the ones he asked of the jury. So
The questionnaire.
So the one thing that I was able to learn very quick, that part of trial work is being able to think on your feet. So
Absolutely.
He finished with his, and he says, "Okay, Mr. Hallman, any questions?" And only thing I could come up with, I stood up and I said, "No, Your Honor, I think with the questions you've asked, this is a fine bunch for jurors." And I sat down.
That's a power move, Judge. They never saw it coming on the defense.
So that I got through that, and actually I didn't know anything about laying foundations for an accident reconstructionist. That was one of the witnesses. I had no idea. I'd never heard of such.
Right.
So I just called down the witness list, and in comes the accident reconstruction person who's actually going to put the defendant behind the wheel.
Right.
And to show you how little I knew about trial work is, I started asking questions, and the attorney, objection predicate.
You didn't know what that meant, right?
I didn't know what that meant, so I whirled around. The judge said, "Mr. Hallman," and I said, "Are we going to get into grammar, because that's ridiculous?" So to the bench we go, and the judge went, "He just wants you to ask these questions," and the judge lined them out. So I went back, asked those questions, and got the answer. Started to the next question. Objection predicate. I said, "We need to approach. I've had enough." And we went up. The judge said, "We just need to ask these questions. Come on."
Same type of thing,
Yeah.
right? Every
so
time.
I went back and I started asking. I got through 2 of them, and I said, "Judge, we need to approach again." And so I got through it, got a conviction on that, and then
Good.
Of course, I went on to, as a defense attorney, to try a lot of cases, death penalty cases and DUIs, and all very interesting. I enjoyed it. I really did enjoy that work.
I got a kick out of it. You talking about approaching so often. When I was in front of Judge Militello down in Sumter, I remember one of the first cases I had, same type of thing, right? I had a little bit of help. Dan Snow, right? He was giving me some tips and some pointers. He'd sit on some of them, helping me out. But I got in one I didn't have Dan there, and I was pretty green. I started going back and forth, and Judge Militello says, "Mr. Bullock, I think you're going to wear the bottoms off of them shoes." He said, "You're doing fine. Just."
Judge Militello replaced me on the misdemeanor docket.
Oh, I didn't realize you were on them. I thought you were, I thought you were doing felony.
No. I mean, as the prosecutor's office, when I was doing the 1 month I did those 2 trials.
He was the
next thing he shows up, and they said he's going to take over. You're going to felony. So I was in felony right off the bat, which was.
They didn't keep you for very long there, huh?
No, the felonies, and I always said as an attorney, it seemed like whatever I did, the opposing counsel was like the best there was in the land. And
right.
One of the things was, for example, as a prosecutor, all the top defense attorneys showed up, and I tried them against the top defense attorneys. And then to show you how that worked, when I went into private practice, I had a guy come by. It just shows you how you've got to. A guy came by, he was wearing overalls, and he said, "I just sold my barbecue recipe, and I need you to draw up a contract for me." So I draw up a contract, and I give it to him to go run it by the other side. I get a call from a law firm in Miami on Biscayne Boulevard, and fortunately my secretary took a message, and I was going to call him back, and I looked up in Martindale-Hubbell, which they had about 15 pages of lawyers,
right.
AV rated in Martindale-Hubbell.
Makes you cringe a little bit.
And so when I called him back and going through the contract with him, and having to go because he'd say things like, and we always laughed about this. I talked to lawyers afterwards. He was probably bluffing. He goes, "Hey, you put that paragraph in there, and you remember that case, Bayliner Boats versus Smith, and that contract mess that came out of that?" And I just went, "Well, yeah, that I think I can reword that."
Because how else do you respond, right?
Yeah,
You don't have it offhand.
Yeah, let me check. I didn't tell him I needed to read that case, but anyhow,
right.
That was usually I think it was a fortunate thing.
Right.
That because I did a lot of areas. I represented Hernando County on the as a private attorney on the prosecution of the bad construction licenses.
Really?
Yeah, and the attorney that always appeared on the other side was the guy that wrote the book on how to do those. And, again, but it was great because all these people I'm talking about, they wrote the governor.
And how else are you going to learn? You know
Right.
what I mean?
Oh,
So
yeah,
if you're learning with that, you're learning the best, right? I mean,
Right, and they're running cases at you that you learn those cases that, on their motions to dismiss and stuff like that. And then you have to research it and get much more knowledgeable going up against.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know, your thoughts on this. You may disagree with me, but my thing is that I think a lot of people when they first start, lawyering, I think that they overthink things. If you take it kind of back to the general concepts, you can really slim them down and make it easier work, and that was one of the things I felt like I learned pretty quick in there is like, this may be complicated, but when you get down to the nuts and bolts, it's much more manageable,
Well, I think that's in anything, and I'll just make a reference to like steer wrestling, the guy that taught me how to steer wrestle. He said, the way you are, this is what you do. And whenever I would quit winning, the only thing he'd ever say, he said, you remember what I taught you. And those basics are how you win. It's the basics that let you win. But you never know what's going to happen with a steer. Because that's a mind that's thinking on its own. And so you don't know what you're going to get when you grab a hold of the, like Forrest Gump, box of chocolates, you never know what you're going to get. You get in trial, like I had one, a murder trial. It wasn't first degree, it wasn't death penalty assault, but, it was, he confessed. It was a good,
that makes it a lot harder to be defense on.
Bone-chilling confession. So my only defense really in the case was that he was too dumb to understood that he was confessing to the murder because he had pretty bright investigators that were questioning him and the way they framed their questions, everything. So I made that argument, and I tried to I was going to make an argument that some people just need killing. He did a public service, but I get to I put him on the stand so that they would see how really dumb he was.
Right.
So I fortunately had a jury of what I'll call good old boys, because I thought they'll understand that, my theories of the case. Well, we had a prosecutor that had come in from up north that was very, very good. And I'm not trying to pick on regional people, but he gets on the stand, and he's sitting there, and every question on cross that she asked, he would go, "Yes, ma'am, I reckon." And she goes, "What'd you say?" He said, "I said, yes, ma'am, I reckon." She said, "Are you threatening me?" And that went on, and so I kind of let it run. Well, back then, if all you did was put your client on the stand, is you got to do first and last closing as the defense counsel.
I wish they still did.
Yeah. So I got up and made the closing that I've told you about, that that was not a confession, and that he really didn't understand what was going on, and we went on with that. Well, I sit down, and the prosecutor gets up and said, "This is a thoroughly dangerous man, and you heard him threatening me. You heard him threatening me. He said he was going to wreck me. He was going to wreck me. He was going to wreck me." The bailiff sitting next to me, and he said, "You're not going to do this, are you?" I said, "I am." He said, "Don't do it. The judge will get mad." I said, "I am going to do that." And so I walked up, and I put my hands in my pockets and sat behind the podium there and kind of shuffled for a few minutes, and I said, I'm glad that you can't be prosecuted for the way you talk, because I reckon Madam Prosecutor would have me put in jail. The whole group, jurors, breaks up laughing.
That's
they
hilarious.
go laughing. Well,
if you can get them laughing, you're in the right area.
We're done, and the judge reads the jury instructions. They walk out, and Hernando County had a buzzer for when the jury was ready. So they go out and go into the room, and they're putting the shackles to take my client back back to the back. And 5 minutes, we hear,
Quick.
yeah, and he looks at me and he goes, "What's that mean?" I said, "Well, you confessed. I mean, that confession.
We think we know what
confession
that
was,
means.
yeah, it's pretty bone-chilling confession. I mean, you didn't have to go into that great detail about how you killed the guy." And so they come walk in. The jurors are still laughing, and they're looking at me laughing, and I'm going, "Do they think I did that bad a job? I mean, I did what I could do." And they sat down. The judge asked them for the verdict, and they started laughing. The foreperson stood up,
Gave him
handed
the
it
verdict.
over. There's the verdict. Not guilty.
Man, that's what I say. If you can get them laughing, you're
That-
working in the right area,
And that's just
right?
you play off. It wasn't meant to brag, but you play off of what's
What do you
happening
have?
in the trial, and stay in. You never know what's going to happen in a trial.
That's one of those things that I learned, pretty early into this. I was dealing with these prosecutors, and they're using the big words. We're here on this theory, da 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 da. We submit this or that, or however they're talking. I get up there and I say, "Listen, guys, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed here, but it don't make sense to me, And jurors like that. I at least in my experience,
I've always
they do.
found that when an opposing counsel in a jury trial tries to sound, and I would tell lawyers when they'd ask me, how did I lose that case? I said, the way you talked to the jury, you're talking
like a lawyer,
you're talking almost like you're talking down to them.
right?
And I said, you've got to,
I think that's important, like you say.
whenever opposing counsel would get in with this brilliant talk of this, that, and the other, that I picked up something from in the Midnight of Garden, in the Garden of Good and Evil. It was about Savannah and a trial in Savannah, Georgia,
Right.
and Bobby Lee Cook, I don't know, from Georgia, was a famous defense attorney at the time, but anyhow, I guess he said, the prosecutor got up, made a closing argument about all these great philosophers and things like that, and he got up and said, well, I don't know much about these philosophers, but you know who I do know? Perry Mason. Y'all know Perry Mason?
Make it relatable.
Yeah,
Make it relatable.
But, yeah, Perry wouldn't have had this one on TV because he'd have said, well, that's not much of a case to show on TV. So, that's just picking up on things that you can do during the trial, and I do think that lawyers need to understand that. I heard it when I used to buy all kinds of tapes of Jerry Spence and some of the great lawyers and watching them in trial.
Right. Seeing how they're doing.
And I remember one thing that I think he might have said, that when you're talking to a jury, you talk like you're talking at the bar. And he said, not the Florida bar, but the local bar.
The real bar.
Yeah.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. Well, Judge, I think we're running out of time here. Anything else that you want to put out there, or anything?
I don't know. I want to thank you for having me on. I love talking about I wanted to be a cowboy and a sophisticated lawyer, so talking about cowboy and the rodeos and the courtroom drama, I love talking about it.
That's my favorite stuff, Judge. I was happy to have you on.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you for
Thank
being
you.
here.